Andrew Scheer sets this reporter straight.
When you say that you're using every tool at your disposal, just how far in a legislative sense does that mean? Like, are you considering the kind of like filibustering and delay tactics that were used in the fall?
Well, right now we're going through that departmental spending kind of line by line, department by department. As you know, in the last Parliament, there's a bit of a deadlock in the House of Commons because the Liberals refused to hand over documents related to a massive spending scandal, a massive corruption scandal. Right now in the House of Commons, that's not happening. That Liberal privilege motion it just doesn't exist after the election. So we're going to use our ability to pour through that departmental spending. We've got more debates tonight and again tomorrow night, and trying to hold up a picture to Canadians of how much of their tax dollar is going to interest payments on the debt after 10 years of Liberal deficits, what impact on inflation this continued borrowing will have, and whether or not the government's actually following through. You know, Mark Carney was claiming he was the man with the plan. He was the guy you hire in a crisis. And then he can't even come to Canadians with a budget to outline how he's going to tackle these key issues facing Canadians, like the housing crisis, like inflation, like the heavy tax burden that Canadians suffer from. More and more Canadians are going to food banks. We've heard tragic stories of seniors moving out of their homes to have to move in with their children, or in some tragic cases into their vehicles. So the cost of living crisis is still affecting so many Canadians, and Conservatives are really trying to expose all this Liberal mismanagement.
You notice how the reporter blames the Conservatives for filibustering and delay tactics, even though they were going after a Liberal scandal? We wouldn't be in this position in the first place if the Liberals just spent the money and allocated the money properly. This is very, very typical gaslighting from the mainstream media, and Scheer just stepped around it, ignored it, gave a proper answer.
In terms of the government's main estimates, is it still your party's intention to vote against it?
Well, we had a situation last week where the government had, consider this, Mark Carney in his throne speech promised to cap departmental spending at 2%. In other words, that it would not grow by more than 2%. He then tabled estimates that had growth of 8%. This is just unsustainable. All this government debt washing around really means that more and more of your tax dollars goes to pay the interest on that debt. So bankers and bondholders get a big chunk of your tax payments, and future generations have to pay it back with higher taxes. So we don't support this level of spending. In a minority context, it's up to the government to try to find ways to get their legislation through and to get their spending through. But we're going to continue over the next few days to highlight all this wasteful spending, mismanagement, and corruption that is continuing to happen under Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney.
If this was such a concern, I'm just curious, given the amendment that passed last week to the throne speech, Conservatives urging the government to table a spring budget rather than demanding, if this was such a concern, why use such weak language?
Well, there's parliamentary language that's used when the House of Commons calls on the government to do something that is in effect that the House is demanding it. It used to be in this country before 10 years of Liberal government that governments were meant to respect the will of Parliament. When the House of Commons votes in favor of something, that's the democratic expression of a majority of Canadians. And so what we saw last week was the elected representatives of a majority of Canadians called for the government to table that budget.
And that's just a fact of the matter. A majority of the House voted for them to table a budget, and the Liberal government flat out ignored it. This shows you how Mark Carney works. This shows you how this air quotations new government works. He stood there and told Canadians to value Canadian traditions, but he clearly can't even do it himself. I can only imagine a non-confidence vote coming soon because this minority government isn't listening to a majority of this House. Anyway, I'd like to know what you think down in the comment section below. Hit that like button and that sub button if you are new, and thank you very much for watching.